Mulder, did you see their eyes? If I were that stone...
Ooh, if you were that stone, what?
Mulder, you could have shown that kid a picture of a flying hamburger, and he would have told you that's exactly what he saw.
Hello, and welcome to Discovering the X-Files, the podcast in which a newbie, that's me, takes a deep dive into the entirety of Chris Carter's creepy universe as longtime fans escort me on the journey, a journey filled with paranoid conspiracies and monsters of the week. I'm Erix Antoine, and today Daniel and I will be discussing the episode Deep Throat, which originally aired in the US on September 17th, 1993. It was written by series creator Chris Carter and directed by Daniel Sackheim. In this episode, Mulder and Scully investigate a conspiracy in the U.S. Air Force, and Mulder meets the title character, a deeply connected man of mystery who warns him to stay away from the case. Mulder, of course, doesn't heed those warnings. He goes ahead and investigates the mysterious aircraft at the Air Force base, but is unfortunately brainwashed, or something, and left with no memory of his shocking discoveries. Deep Throat, played by Jerry Hardin, will go on to be a very important recurring character in this series. And so, after the break, Daniel and I are going to have a nice little talk. Stick around.
Mr. Mulder, why are those like yourself who believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life on this earth not dissuaded by all the evidence to the contrary?
Because all the evidence to the contrary is not entirely dissuasive.
Precisely.
They're here, aren't they?
Mr. Mulder, they've been here for a long, long time.
So here we are. This is the second episode of The X-Files. The second episode, although I guess depending on how you look at things, it could be considered the first official episode, as some people might consider pilots to be kind of separate entities.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on where you're coming from, but here you essentially, I think you can make that separation because in this case you have, for the first time, you have the iconic credits sequence, which I think that even people who aren't like fans of the show or they know that, they like that iconic music by Mark Snow and the credit sequence, even if you're like, it's the kind of thing kind of stays in your head. That credit sequence is pretty damn iconic. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't it remain essentially unchanged for many, I don't know if the whole run, but for a long time?
For the most part, as without getting too far ahead of ourselves, as some cast changing stuff happens on the back end of things, a little bit of it's altered a little bit, but for the most part, the only real changes, as far as I can remember, are sometimes the text message at the end is different as you get further into things.
Right. It's a different text message for each season, I believe. So like we're in the first season where it's the truth is out there. It's like that seems to be the underlying theme, the message. I think that's the intention of that message at the end of the credit sequence is to sort of, it's, I guess, the thesis of the season, the mission statement of the season, or however you want to look at it. And so that's pretty interesting. So, this is the first season and this is the truth is out there. And clearly that's what we see in this episode, that the truth is out there. And it's the introduction of Deep Throat, as the episode title will tell us, played by Jerry Hardin, who, speaking of iconic things, Jerry Hardin, again, makes a really strong impression in that role. He appears several times throughout the season and throughout the series or whatever, but he makes a very intriguing impression. The thing is that they don't refer to him as Deep Throat in this episode. The implication is made simply the fact that the title of the episode is Deep Throat, and there's a focus on, once again, it's focusing on the conspiracy, and we see that character who's never named, and so we're supposed to make the natural connection that, okay, well, that's Deep Throat. And I guess my question would be, is he supposed to be the Deep Throat?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure, at least in the context of the series story itself. I know Chris Carter, of course, fashioned him to a degree on the original Deep Throat. Definitely took a few pages out of the All the President's Men film. And then apparently Donald Sutherland in JFK as X was also an inspiration for the character. But I don't know. That's a good question. I would assume, I guess maybe not, because eventually you do learn his name and it's not Mark Felt. But then again, maybe in this world, Mark Felt wasn't Deep Throat. Maybe this was Deep Throat all along. So
yes, well, my point is that I'm not sure if this is correct. I guess we'd have to do like a Google on this or whatever. But I mean, this aired in 1993, and I'm not sure if by this time we knew that Deep Throat was Mark Felt. I think we didn't know yet.
We might not have.
Yeah, we might not have known, and now we know, of course. But I think at this time we still didn't know. I don't know. I mean, Jerry Hardin, I think he kind of looks like Mark Felt. I mean, compare like that.
Yep, I can see it.
One of those. He looks more like Mark Felt than Hal Holbrook.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he makes a very strong impression in the episode, which, much like the first episode, it kind of continues along that line. Although, and I mean, I guess this is a consequence of the syndication aspect, or the consequence of like television of the time, where it's the kind of thing where if you haven't seen the pilot, it doesn't matter. This could be the first episode of X-Files that you're watching. It kind of gives you enough, you jump right in, you get it pretty much. And in some ways it kind of goes out of its way to even explain even more, so that you'll be very clear on exactly what's going on. But it does have this sort of feeling where it's not picking up events from the previous week. It's just sort of, they're going about their business.
In a way, it's entirely possible that they might have done a couple more cases in between that we just didn't see, especially with their relationship. She's awfully combative in this episode, especially early on, which I'd completely forgotten about.
Yeah, Scully, I was going to say that because she's really feisty. It's like I like her in this episode, but she's really feisty. There's something like, it's not quite the same as she was in the pilot episode. There is a certain there is an aggressiveness to her that wasn't present there. And when you said that they might have done that, we can sort of intimate that they've done other cases in between. We just don't know about them because this is not taking place right after the pilot. It's taking place several weeks later, maybe, or whatever. So it stands to reason that this is not their first case after what happened in the pilot. And it's also possible that the episodes were not produced in the order in which they aired. And not only possible, I'm sure that that's certain, because a lot of shows are done that way. It's possible that this wasn't exact. It's not like they shot the episodes in order,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, obviously they did the pilot. That was the first thing they did. And then, so it gets picked up and then they go into production. And it just might be that these episodes were not shot in the order that they're going to air. And that could have an effect in the sense of continuity for the performances, for the actors, to sort of, and especially since the different episodes have different directors. And I think that has an effect, and it's not something that it's something to consider when you watch these shows that are not serialized or not, heavily serialized, that you do sometimes see these sorts of things where characters will sometimes be out of character. Because again, she is a little bit more aggressive than she was in the first episode. I don't know if it would be what the Hawksian woman, as they sometimes call it. It has sort of that thing. There is a kind of, actually, or more like there is kind of a His Girl Friday kind of thing to it too, like
a little bit, yeah.
There's that sassiness that was not present in the first episode, and so that's why I would be curious to see if that was something that is just here, or are we going to start seeing more of that in the coming episodes? You can go ahead and tell me that, like if like that, this is how the character starts to develop and she becomes sassier. Like I don't know if that's like a key element of the character.
She's definitely not afraid to speak her mind, and I'm sure she gets sassy with him from time to time. I don't remember it being to this particular degree, but the thing I love most about it is she's not being mean to him. She just seems utterly exasperated that she's being potentially dragged off on this who knows how crazy UFO excursion that he wants to do, and she's just sitting there thinking about how in the world she's going to have to make it sense in terms of the paperwork that she has to turn in. And then on top of her combativeness, he's clearly not quite gaslighting her, but he's poking at her a bit because he knows it's irritating her, and he's just fueling the fire a little bit more just for his own amusement.
Yeah, well, there's a certain gleefulness to what he does, to his attitude. You definitely see, Mulder, the character, and I would say the actor probably as well, but the character definitely, you see that he's taking a certain pleasure in this, where it's like, for him, this matters. Like he totally buys into the whole thing. He knows that she thinks he's full of shit. He knows that she thinks it's all a bunch of bullshit, but he doesn't care. For him, it's extremely amusing to like watch her get frustrated, and like the scene at the bar. He's all about that shit. He's totally into it. He knows that she's looking at him like he's insane, but he's looking at all the pictures, and then he gets particularly obsessed with that one picture, which, I mean, frankly, I gotta give it to Scully. I mean, that looks really stupid. It looks like somebody grabbed like a pizza box and threw it up in the air and took a picture. And so obviously she's like, really? Like this is your big UFO space plane? Although like there is that really good line where he says something to the effect of, look, it's an unidentified flying object. So technically it is a UFO. Like that's, a UFO doesn't necessarily mean an extraterrestrial spacecraft. It
Right.
just means a flying object that you cannot identify. So yes, it is a UFO.
My two favorite moments on this particular front are right after he buys the picture for $20 and she leans over and whispers "sucker."
Yes, exactly.
And the second one is after they have their little meal with the two teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets into the car with something in his hand, and she says, "What is that?" And he says, "It's evidence." And he pops it into the stereo, and it's just a heavy metal cassette tape. And he starts air guitaring in the seat beside her until she turns it off.
Yes,
He's
exactly.
doing it entirely to make her mad.
Yeah, right. That whole thing with Seth Green and what she, the stoner Seth Green, who in fact, at least reportedly, was not an actual stoner, so he was very much acting, and maybe that's why he slightly overplays it, because he's not an actual stoner. So, he's not really, at least at that point. Maybe he became one later, but at least at that point he was not, and so he was simply just sort of performing as he believed a stoner would behave. But there is that really funny line too, where it's like, well, he said, this is it. This is exactly what I saw. And then she's like, did you see his eyes? Like you could have shown him that hamburger and he would have been like, that's what I saw. But yeah, this is once again, so this is what is called a mythology episode, right? Because there's something to differentiate in the X-Files canon. You have the Monster of the Week episodes, and you have the mythology episodes. And there are some fans who are all about, like, they hate the mythology episodes. So this is, as I understand it, and others who embrace them. And I was wondering, maybe we could talk about that for a second. Like, I mean, you're aware of that concept, right? Mm-hmm. That there are certain fans who shun the mythology episodes, and I'm kind of curious to see your perspective on it, because I know you like them. That's why we agreed that we're going to go through them for sure. But
I do wonder about how modern fans of it view it now as opposed to the ones that were watching it at the time, because it wasn't so much a problem for me in the early seasons, but in the later seasons, when it was generally airing on Sunday nights, I believe, at least in my area, and sometimes I would miss them, which could be a real problem if you missed a couple of mythology episodes and then you happen upon the next one and you have no clue what's going on, because at that point, the mythology stuff, we're talking 3 or 4 seasons down the line, maybe a little bit further. the mythology episodes have become a bit more serialized at that stage. But right now, this is a mythology episode, but it's still just a separate case. And generally in these early seasons, the mythology episodes tend to be the ones that involve alien encounters or UFO encounters of some kind. And the Monster of the Week ones are a bit more broad in their scope. So I mean, I never had a problem with them because, again, at least early on, if you miss one, it's not really a problem. And they're not so intricately woven and complicated at this stage to where they're hard to follow or you have to remember things a bit more. Even though they're tied together to a degree, they're still very much singular stories from week to week. And it doesn't feel as, I guess, exhausting if you were to sit down and watch a bunch of them in a row right now. And it also helps that they spread in the monster, or at least once we get further down, they're chucking in Monster of the Week ones a whole lot more often to bust it up a bit. But at this stage, I'm just wholly invested in the story that they're going down, seeing how far the conspiracy reaches, seeing, especially with this one, how dangerous it can get for them if they go in too deep on a particular subject. Just wanting to see where it goes in general.
Actually, yeah, what I was getting at is you have a very good point. How would people react now as opposed to then? Because you're right. I mean, I can see myself, if I'm not used to that, if what I'm used to watching is episodic television, where it's like, you jump in and out of it, you try to catch as many episodes as you can, but basically it's, you see the episode, you get the whole story, you got it. You miss next week's, but then the week after that, you watch it. You're still there. I mean, the characters. It's got that whole status quo thing going where it's essentially just it's like a little miniature movie every week.
Right.
But now the nature of television today is most shows now are just serialized. I mean, it's basically that's what it is now, and we live in that era where you can get on Netflix and essentially watch a whole season of television over a weekend as if it were just a very long movie. And that's what people are used to now. So now it's more like maybe the mythology episodes would be most people's jam because it's like, well, this is actually a story. It's a story I can get invested in. This is like, there's a continuity to this. Whereas the Monster of the Week episodes just seem like these throwaway things now, like when you compare it to, it kind of depends on what flavor you're used to when it comes to your entertainment on TV. So people like us, who grew up in the 80s and 90s and, we're used to that type of television. It's fine. People who are more used to the serialized aspect, which is now the standard, will look at it very differently. And it is going to it's a little disconcerting because you have the pilot and you have this, which are very focused on that. And as you said, like they're focused on alien encounters, that kind of thing, the UFO aspect. But they're also focused on the government conspiracy, which really plays heavily into it. I mean, the Deep Throat, all of that stuff, I think is also very much a part of the mythology. I would imagine that in the Monster of the Week stories, that's not as prominent. I mean, it's obviously there because it's all, it's part of the backbone of the series. But I think that where you really see all that government conspiracy stuff, the paranoia thriller aspect, which this episode that's what it is. Like it's basically a paranoia thriller. It's called Deep Throat and it's a throwback to that. It's a throwback to All the President's Men. It's a throwback to the parallax view. That's what it is, and you have Mulder essentially in the Warren Beatty role. He gets really involved in it and they're not going to let him, just like in the pilot, something has to happen that frustrates the discovery. Something has to happen that they can't solve the case entirely. They can't get an answer. It's meant to be unfulfilled. So we talked about for the first episode where we said that they sort of set you up for the reality that you're going to watch these things and you're not always going to get answers. You're not always going to be satisfied, but you'll get bits and pieces. You'll get deep into this conspiracy. It'll be very intriguing, but don't expect answers all the time or most of the time. And that's the case here where, I mean, I guess the central mystery is kind of solved, we the audience get to see the craft, which is either a UFO or a craft that they have developed using UFO technology. That part we can't be sure of, but we know that clearly that craft is there. Clearly, there's something that's not something that we're familiar with, and we also know that those test pilots that they're investigating, by the end of it, we can be sure that these test pilots definitely had something to do with it. They definitely got fucked, just like Mulder gets fucked at the end.
One of the interesting things that the episode doesn't really dwell on, although it lays the information out there, is, anything like this, you start to wonder, well, why aren't more people talking about it? Why aren't more people, speaking up about things? And of course, you've got the military base. So you have the one wife of the one pilot who lost it years ago, who is mad that her neighbor brings the FBI agents into her home because even though her husband was forever changed, isn't entirely functional anymore, the Army is still paying them a salary. They're still letting them live on the base. They're still giving them full benefits. She doesn't want to mess up that free ride. So
Right.
her lips are sealed. And then, of course, they clearly also have the ability to wipe your memory to a degree, which they've used on the pilots, and they also end up using on Mulder. So that's a nice way of filling out the conspiracy to account for why this stuff isn't discussed more often, why it's not more out in the open.
Yeah, it grounds it. It makes it more believable because that's what they always say about conspiracy theories, that the reason they fall apart if you start to analyze them is because you realize a conspiracy that big going on for that long. I mean, come on. Like, do you realize it's like the whole thing with Stanley Kubrick faking the moon landing, for example? Yeah. Do you realize how many people would have to be involved for that to be the case? How many people would have to basically shut up for years? We're talking about hundreds of people.
I read a statistic on that once. I can't remember the exact number of people that someone said you would have had to get to agree to not say a word. It was a really high number, hundreds of people. And they said that even if all of them intended to uphold that agreement, such conspiracy would still have broken down within 3.5 years by someone just accidentally saying something at some point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, all it takes is one. I mean, all it takes is one night in a bar.
Yep.
Where it's
someone
like you
in their sleep.
that's all. Someone talking to sleep, or just some guy going to a bar, and you figure, oh, it's a bar in the middle of nowhere. Who's gonna know? You're drunk. You don't know what you're saying. You start talking shit. Bing, bing, bing. That's it. It's over. So you're right. This does make it. I guess their approach is by saying, well, it's a pretty contained thing. It's a pretty insular thing, and they're keeping it under wraps through intimidation tactics, obviously, through brainwashing, through all that stuff. And it's also the sort of thing where, yeah, you may know there's a conspiracy, but you can't prove it.
Right.
They're not going to, you may know, and you're going to be right. And they're going to look at you. They're going to look you right in the eye and be like, you're right, but prove it, which is essentially what happens at the end.
Yes.
Where the guy's just saying, look, I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. Yes. Things are not what they appear. Yes. But so what are you going to do next? Like, what's next? Just get in your car and leave, leave with your tail between your legs. But I mean, they do a number on Mulder, right? I mean, they essentially, we are led to believe that they do to him what they've done to the test pilots.
Yeah, just not as extreme because it's been a shorter amount of time that they're probably wiping away.
Okay, because that's the thing. That would be my next question, because I figure what this has told me is you look at, there's two test pilots. You look at the first one, the one that we see in the beginning with the rashes and all that, right? Mm-hmm. When he comes back, he's relatively like lucid, essentially. Yeah. The wife is saying what she's saying, and it's she's scared of him, whatever. But when Mulder and Scully are interviewing him, he essentially seems to be fairly lucid, with the exception of those details that he begins to get confused about. But the other guy's totally baked, and you go like, what happened there? What did he see? He must have seen a lot more. I guess that's the implication, that they had to totally fry him, because I mean, he was way too involved, apparently.
Yeah. My guess would be that Mulder comes out okay, because who knows what their process is to do this, but they're conceivably only wiping away a day or two of his memory, whereas, I would assume the Too Far Gone pilot probably had months, maybe years
Yeah.
wiped out of
Yeah.
his brain, and it was just too much for his brain to handle.
And we are, of course, expected to take this at face value as something completely plausible,
Right.
within the reality of the show. I don't know to what extent it's realistic, but the naturalism of the series does make it plausible. You look at it. I liken it to, this is the what I like to call like the Christopher Nolan approach, where it's a bunch of gobbledygook, but they approach it so convincingly with this naturalism, where they basically put this gobbledygook in front of you, and you don't have to suspend your disbelief too much. You go like, well, there's a naturalism to this. They are saying it with such convincing tones that you buy it, even though if you stop to really think about it, you're like, yeah, but really, like, because that's like the thing about like the credibility of it. That's why like the Mulder thing kind of stuck out when I watched it, because I'm going like, yeah, but Jesus, I mean, this is going to have repercussions. You would think. I mean, you'd think that this guy's going to be having nightmares, and I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe that's the case. I mean, he is kind of a weird guy, so they can play that off even in future episodes if you want to give it an internal continuity. Since he is a weirdo, you go like any little tics or anything that comes up, you're just like, oh well, that's probably because of the time that they fried his brain.
I did see something, but it's gone. They took it from me. They erased it.
The special effects are minimalist. That is something that I wanted to point out. I really liked that. I think that their approach to do something very minimalist with the special effects lends it to have aged very well.
Yeah, it gives it a more timeless quality.
Yeah, it has, the scene where he goes in there and then the spacecraft comes. It looks pretty cool. They managed to do something pretty like impressive. It's an impressive shot. When the thing flies over, and it's very close encounters. They did something very minimalist with a whole bunch of lights and then this thing that I mean, I'm guessing it was computer generated because it's just sort of inserted there. And
I'm pretty sure it was completely computer generated.
Yeah, but it looks good. They did enough with the design of it, and they obscure it enough where you just get what you need, and then it's off. It's more about the impact. It's his reaction, and it's things like that where like I really appreciate that. So I go like, yeah, that, and it doesn't date the show. It doesn't, like, you can watch this. Here we are, like almost 30 years later, and it's fine. It's not like, oh, that's so 90s. There's a bunch of movies you'll watch from like I don't know what it was. I think it was, yeah, it was like the first Resident Evil movie, which I believe is from 2002, and it has some rather wonky CGI effects, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And so like I'm sitting there, and it gets to the thing where they're fighting that monster at the end on the train or in the lab or wherever it was, and I'm just going like, wow, yeah, this is so 2002. That's so very much, that is so Screen Gems budget, like 2002 digital effects. And like that's the sort of thing that you don't see here. You don't really, it's they did something nice and clean. So like that's a feature that I really appreciated.
Going minimalist with it really was the way to go. I mean, if this was some random show nowadays, it would probably be raining outside. It would probably be cloudy. The design would probably be overcomplicated, and it would probably move way too much and draw more attention to itself, and then in turn make it look a bit too weightless, which is a problem I have with a lot of more on CGI humanoid characters now, but a lot of them just look like rubbery feathers flying through the air with no weight to them whatsoever. Whereas if you just go simple, it's making movements, but it's more slow. You get to take it in more. It's just not overstuffed and over designed. By making it minimalist, it really makes it less about the effect itself and more about his reaction to it, his awe of standing there and staring at it, actually seeing something that he's already believed in forever. whether it be an actual alien craft or a man-made craft made to mimic an alien craft.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And I think that, I mean, reportedly, they weren't, at the time at least, they weren't 100% happy with it. I think that they felt, I don't know if it was Chris Carter or maybe the director of the episode or whoever, but someone said at the time, yeah, that could have been better. Like referring to the lights, I think, or whatever it was, where it's like, yeah, we could have done a little better than that, because like it's done in stages. I mean, first he's there, and then you see like the bunch of lights coming towards the camera, or you see like a light in the distance. And something about it didn't please them at the time. I think they were going for, maybe they were hoping it would be more spectacular. But whatever the case, I think that ultimately it works better. It ultimately had a positive effect, because I think that if they had done what they wanted, if they had gotten the spectacular effect that they were looking for, I think that, like you're saying, it would have been something where you would have seen that, and then now you look at it and you go like, wow, that's pretty corny now. I mean, that's. I also don't know. I mean, I watched it on Hulu, and again, like I think that that's got a pretty good. They're obviously using the high def transfers, and so maybe they did some cleaning up. I would imagine that they did.
Probably a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think they redid any effects or anything like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that it just looks really good. I mean, it looks, and it doesn't look like something new. Like it doesn't look like they when they animated this new like CGI thing to make it look pop out or whatever. It doesn't look like that, and it just looks really good. It looks really simple and really clean. But yeah, I mean, the what I brought up at the beginning was how this once again is kind of unresolved. But I guess that's the nature of the beast, so to speak. It's the nature, like it's supposed, like that's what they set up in the pilot. That this is not so much about solving mysteries; it's about asking questions, and then about getting you to sort of talk about, getting you to think about it. But in this particular case, it's more like it's unresolved for the characters, but we as an audience get a little bit more. And given the ending, as I understand it, that narration at the end was sort of added. It's like ADR, where they basically said, we need more info. You got to give us a little bit more. And like just have the voiceover kind of give us more. But what the voiceover does is essentially spells it out, like spells out what, if you've been paying attention, you could probably have figured that out. But instead it's like, yes, the UFO, the UFO, the unidentified flying object, which Mulder believed was made with alien technology. But that's what you're sort of, it's like, I gathered that as I was watching it. Thank you. But you're like spitting it back out to me. It's kind of like the ending of LA Confidential, where when Guy Pearce sits there and like basically just explains the whole plot of the movie to like, just in case he didn't understand like all the details. So like that's sort of what I got out of that. Like that, and that feels to me like studio interference. That feels to me like it doesn't feel like it's bad writing necessarily. I'm pretty sure they had a solid script and everything, but someone said no, but there's gonna be some dum-dums. Some of our TV viewers might not be that sharp. You might want to just throw that out there, sort of just to make sure that they got it. And whatever ambiguity that they might have been going for. Overall, it's enjoyable. So yeah, what did you think watching it now?
I think it's great. I think it's even stronger than the pilot. And of course, you were talking about the questions. The way I always like to look at the X-Files, at least, especially the good ones, is once you know what's going on in the story, at least to a degree, let's say you have about 5 questions in your head. By the end, it might answer 3 of them. It won't answer the other 2, and then it'll probably add an additional 3 more questions on top of that you have as you leave the episode. So you learn stuff, but you end up just wanting to learn more, which I guess can be frustrating to some people, but it's just the nature of the beast. They're always going to be one step behind the people that they're chasing after, or the mysteries that they're chasing after, and we might be one step ahead of Mulder and Scully, which isn't a problem as long as you like the characters. I've never prescribed to the theory that writing is bad if you're too far ahead of the characters that you're watching. As long as you're invested in them finding out the answers to stuff you already know, it doesn't matter. I think when people have problems with plots like that, it generally falls onto the fact that they're just not as invested with the characters that they're following, so that when they find out the information you already know, you don't care. You don't care what their reaction is to it. Whereas here, at least as far as I'm concerned, I absolutely care, how Mulder and Scully react to everything, and, the consequences of whatever they find or don't find. One other thing that really struck out to me this episode is, we were talking about the little Raiders of the Lost Ark moment at the end of the pilot, and it had never hit my mind before, and it might have been, because of some movie news stuff that happened this week that I won't really get into, but, at the end you have Mulder, running around the track, the little Georgetown University sweat outfit on when he speaks to Deep Throat for the final time in the episode, and it conjured up memories of The Exorcist, of Father Karras, similarly jogging around a track in Georgetown in sweats. Of course, different kind of sweats, but part of me wonders if that was intentional or not. I don't know. It just seemed like an odd way to end things in such a similar way to another paranormal themed classic. And obviously this has nothing to do with possession or exorcism or anything, at least as far as this story goes, but it just seemed like there was some sort of intentional connection there that just really stood out to me this time. I'd never really thought about it before.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I certainly didn't think about that, but you do have a point. And I mean, look, the whole episode is kind of a throwback to the paranoia thrillers of the 70s in a sense,
Sure.
and I'm certain that it's not the only episode that's going to have that feature.
Definitely
because
not.
This is not, but they're establishing that aspect of the series in this episode, and it's very telling that it's essentially the first episode of the series, because it's almost like they want you to really pay attention to this, because they want to tell you this is what we're about. So pay attention, because this is what it is. And then from here on in, there might be other kinds of stories or things, but it all comes back to this. So I guess they're really into it. I mean, you have it wouldn't surprise me if a part of them, maybe Chris Carter or whoever, there is an aspect that they wanted to make that connection, even if it's very subtle, certainly not deliberate. But Father Karras went to Georgetown, so it's a thing where you went ahead and you made that connection, and part of it could be because there's as of this recording, they've announced an Exorcist sequel or reboot or whatever, right? And so that's why it's on your mind, and then that obviously influenced you as you were watching the show. So yeah, one could say maybe you're reaching, but at the same time, the fact that there is a relationship, like this series seems to be having a conversation with those classic films. Yeah, there's little bits and pieces. It's like a big stew. You put all these ingredients in there, and so clearly there is no question that the people behind X-Files, starting from Chris Carter and everyone else, are big admirers of films like The Exorcist and Raiders of the Lost Ark, as we talked about last week, and everything else. So little things, little bits and pieces, little Easter eggs. It would not surprise me at all that some of those might have been intentional.
I was also thinking about the fact that, of course, we talked about Mulder being brainwashed after he's captured, and then Scully has to pretty much bargain for his return, which begs the question, would they have killed him and just covered it up as an accident? Oh, he wandered onto the military base, the MP didn't know who he was, and bang, oops, we accidentally killed an FBI agent, we're so sorry. Obviously now we know that Mulder is one of the main elements of the entire series, all 11 seasons and the 2 films that they've done. But at the time, I was a little bit too little to even consider this in my head when I was watching it, but I have to wonder if adults or people older than 9-year-old me were sitting there watching it wondering if he wasn't going to make it out of the episode alive and that she would be carrying things on going forward. Maybe they're Janet Leeing him 2 episodes into the series and Scully's really the lead all along. It raises the level of stakes really early on for a show like this. generally I wouldn't expect, especially a 20-some episode series, to pull we might bump off one of the protagonists in the second episode. You'd expect that for the mid-season finale or sweeps week in May or whenever, but not right off the bat like that. So I thought it was interesting that they would raise the stakes to that level that fast, just to let you know how serious it is if they get too close to certain aspects of this conspiracy.
That's a good point in terms of the stakes. I don't know that anybody would have thought that he was going to die, because, I mean, sure, you want to Janet Leigh someone, but I think just common sense, in the opening titles, it's like starring David Duchovny, and like, you go like, well, I mean, they're not going to kill off the like in this, it's, what is this? Did the show? Then you'd like look it up. Did the show get canceled? Are we only going to get like 2 episodes? No, I don't know that you would think that he's going to die, but it still has the effect of raising the stakes, because what you realize is that, okay, they're not going to die necessarily, but they're not safe.
Right.
They're not safe, and so their position does not protect them in any way. They are as vulnerable as anybody else. It doesn't matter. Like, the people that are truly in charge, the people who are truly pulling the strings, do not give a shit about Mulder and Scully.
Yeah.
So Mulder and Scully are definitely expendable people. They're not going to die in the show, at least not at this point. They could potentially die in a future season, but at this point, no, because it's just the second episode. But it's just showing you that they are definitely expendable.
Right.
And as far as like, and in the logic of the story, though, I don't know if you're even supposed to believe that they would kill him, because if they were gonna, as you said, just kill him, then they would have just killed him. And there would be no point in like grabbing him and taking him to the facility and going through that whole rigmarole of like drugging him and doing all the stuff they do. If they could just as easily put a bullet in his head and dump him in the river, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, that would be a lot easier than going through the trouble of erasing 48 hours from his memory. So I think that there's a part of them where it's like, okay, we can't kill this guy, because that'll just raise too many questions. We got to give him back. It's like let's clean up. Let's do some cleanup, and then we'll give him back. So that's all. And that it goes back to like that final moment when, the guy that was posing, he turns out he's posing as a reporter, right? The shady like agent. Yeah. So like when he shows his true colors, and then Scully gets all badass on him, that whole thing. By the end of it, it's like, the truth is, I let you do this. I played along with you.
Yeah.
All right. Here's your partner. It's all good. But now I think now you understand what's going on. You understand your position here. So, just leave.
Yeah, it comes off more as a warning shot, really.
Mm-hmm.
This is how little we care about you. This is what we can do to you, and we can do worse, and we will if you keep this up. And on their part, they're probably thinking, all right, we've scared them enough. Maybe they'll drop it. Whereas, obviously it ends up having the opposite effect with Mulder. It just only further emboldens him on his quest.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of it, he's like, they took something from me. They took it from me. I saw it, but they took it from me. So now it's more like they've pissed him off.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, there is also that logic where these people, as shady as they may be and part of the conspiracy, they do believe. I mean, from their point of view, they're on the same side as Mulder and Scully as far as they're concerned. They're the good guys as well.
Right.
They're just operating on a level where Mulder and Scully are not authorized to go. But as far as they're concerned, they're the good guys. So that's why, in a sense, it's like, yeah, we're not going to kill you. We're not bad people. We're going to rough you up a little bit. Yeah, we're going to, teach you a little lesson and then send you on your way crying. Now so just, don't fuck around. Yeah. So like that's essentially what happens at the end. And yeah, it definitely does sort of, between the pilot and this, you basically get a real sense of that's what this show is. And it's a little bit risky because maybe not everybody was going to be into that, right? Yeah. On the one hand, it was like, oh, it's one of those conspiracy things, kind of like whatever. And then on the other hand, you have a situation where like people who are really into that, then when you get to the next episode that's going to have nothing to do with this, some people might be like, okay. What's this now? So it's definitely risky. Like I commend once again the show's quality is unmistakable. It's a very well written, well directed show. It's got a great look. I really like the performances. I really like Mulder and Scully. Like I think that they were very well cast in those roles, and they're just great on screen together, and they each have a special energy that is unique for TV characters. There's a uniqueness to them, and you really see that here.
Yeah, I completely agree. The writing's great across the board. Jerry Hardin's great as Deep Throat, but like we talked about in the last episode, and then a lot again here, at the end of the day, it wouldn't work without both of our leads being great and being great together. And Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny are absolutely perfect together. I could sit and watch them argue in a diner for an entire episode, and I'd be fine with it.
Mulder, come on. You've got 2 blurry photos. One of them taken almost 50 years ago, and another one you purchased today in a roadside diner. You're going out on a pretty big limb.
Tell me there isn't a remarkable resemblance.
Tell me one good reason why either of these photos is authentic.
You saw exactly what I saw in the sky tonight. What do you think they were?
Just because I can't explain it doesn't mean I'm going to believe they were UFOs.
Unidentified flying objects. I think that fits the description pretty well. Tell me I'm crazy.
Mulder, you're crazy.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our discussion, and if you did, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a like, take a minute to write a positive review, and go ahead and spread the word on social media. The podcast is available on Anchor FM, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Look for the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook and on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet. And check out my reviews on Letterboxd. There's quite a few, and there will be more. You should also check out Daniel Baldwin's website, theschlocketeer.com, and follow him on Twitter at Daniel W. Baldwin. I'm Erix Antoine, and I'll be back in a few days, along with Daniel, to talk about Squeeze, the X-Files episode, not the rock band, though I guess Daniel and I have occasionally been tempted by the fruit of another, because it happens to the best of us. In any case, I hope you'll join us. So until then, let's all remember that the truth is out there. See you next time.